capital model that really preserves that privileges financial capital over anything else in the business mix. Typical, if you look at a venture deal, what it's going to be about half the money is to the investors and about half the money is to the founders, and maybe a little bit of money goes to the staff. What about a business organization where those were split in thirds equally? Where you honor the value of capital and you honor the value of founders and innovation and the blood, sweat, and tears that a founder brings, but you also honor the people who actually build the organization and do the work day by day. Can we reinvent capitalism? Can we rescue capitalism from itself as it is in the process of beating itself about the head this century? This is not just a crazy guy from Berkeley saying this. Wall Street Journal was quoting Marx in an editorial a couple of years ago, talking about what Marx described as the classic crisis of capitalism. You're building productivity, you're trying to drive down wages. As you drive down wages, people lose purchasing power, they stop buying stuff, the market goes down, so you have this trough and peak pattern that we've all known. Marx would argue that it was structural in capitalism. Wall Street Journal said, yeah, looks like he was right about that. So what do we do about that? How do we reshape this? And Peter Barnes, who some of you know as one of the founders of Solar Center in San Francisco a long time ago, like 1970s, I think, and one of the founders of Working Assets, the financial services company, offered a provocation some years ago about what he called eco-market socialism. Like, what? What does that mean? He said, no, unpack this. Eco means you play within the boundaries of Earth's living systems. You do what you can to get the prices right so that our economics actually reflect the real costs of living systems. So we have correct guidance system on our decisions. Market, because central planning is not the way that we get there. You have to have the kind of dynamic responsiveness and the cybernetics of a living market where people make exchanges independently based on their own perception of needs, but within the boundaries of an ecological accounting and value system. And socialism, which is a tough word to say in the United States, although apparently not for millennials, I'm told. But what Peter was really talking about was how do we have broader ownership of the means of production, broader participation in the economy, not an economy where there's 1% that has more than half of all value, and in the United States today, 1 out of 5 people poor after all the government supports that we provide. By the way, in Denmark, it's 8%, just gives you a sense of what's possible there. And so how do we do that? Maybe in the design of your enterprises, maybe in the emergence of more and more cooperative enterprises. Some of you know about the Mondragon family of cooperatives in Spain. There's other activities around the world. Here in the US, there are currently more people working in worker-owned cooperatives than belong to labor unions. Now, that has problems as well as good news in it, but the point is that worker-owned organizations are on the rise for a lot of very good reasons. Is that appropriate for the activity that you're thinking about? Is some kind of broader engagement in ownership and governance feasible? Because again, remember, none of us is as smart as all of us. And so, diversity is not just a social justice concern, it's an intelligence concern, because a business run by a bunch of gray-haired white guys is just not going to see the same things that a business run by a bunch of 30-year-old women, or even better, a business that's a mix of many different kinds of us who can share our different experience and perceptions together. But that can't be just advisory board. That has to be structural relationship to the business, I think, through ownership and other relationships. And so, the question for all of you is, how will you organize your business or your not-for-profit or your government agency around purpose, around what really matters to you and to your stakeholders? How will you measure and manage progress that actually keeps you aligned with that purpose? And how do you include the requisite variety of different kinds of humans, not just in the activities, but in the upside of those activities and the profit participation as well, which brings us to the question of change. And how do we change what we say, and how do we change what we do? So, look, we all know change is hard. I know this well from 4 years of working in a bureaucracy after running my own business for 20 years. Man, is that different. I can tell you about that another time. 4 years there, 30 years working with some of the best companies on the planet, 19 years running my own business, 69 years as a human being struggling to change my own personal habits. Anybody here ever tried to change a habit? Yeah, the rest of you are lying, right? I know that. Any of you ever tried to change a spouse's habits? Yeah, so you know. Extrapolate from that to try and change the habits of the 5 other people in your company, or the 100, or the 100,000 other people in your company, or the 66,000 people in my community. How do we do that? That's really tough. If you kind of follow the stack down of how hard it is for me to just change something that I do in my own daily life where I'm really motivated, I fail a lot. And I sometimes succeed. And we sometimes succeed in our families, and we sometimes succeed in our societies. I mean, I don't know if you're not all old enough, but when I was a kid, it used to be macho cool to drink and drive. I can hold my liquor, and people would do that. They would die and kill other people. And back in the late 1970s, early 1980s, a couple of mothers whose kids had been killed by drunk drivers formed Mothers Against Drunk Driving and launched a remarkable media campaign. And it still happens. We still lose people to drunk driving. We still have 50,000 automobile deaths a year, but the social permission is gone. In most of the country, in most communities, it's just not accepted. The basic understanding has shifted in the course of a generation. So we know it's possible. Challenging, but possible. So I think the core of this is for us to be clear about what really matters, what we really care about. And again, I hope I've made it clear that this is not a woolly-headed concept to have in a business conversation. This is fundamental to a business conversation. What do you really care about? What are you really here to do in your, 5 or 7 or 9 decades on this planet? What are you really here to do? What business are you really in? What is the actual value that you are delivering to your constituents in the way you do business? Because it's not the thing itself, it's what value they get from the thing. It's not that I want to buy energy, I want to be able to be comfortable in my home. I don't want to buy light, I want to be able to read. I don't want to, Amory Lovin said it's not electricity and natural gas, it's cold beer and hot showers. So how do you start thinking about purpose at that level? But really connected to what matters to you. Thelonious Monk, the great jazz pianist, said that the genius is the person who is most like themselves. So who are you really? And what do you care about really? And how do you build a business or a public policy program or an agency around that, to manifest that in the world and deliver that with a fierce commitment and a commitment to design rather than to compromise? When you come across things that look like contending constraints, the challenge of a good designer is to invent a new way to deal with both of them, not just trade one off against the other. If you got multiple kids, you don't, take care of one kid and not the other because you can't figure out how to do both. You figure out how to do both. It's just, we know this. So a fierce commitment to design and innovation, and obviously this takes courage and this takes respect, and it begins, I think, with how we speak. How we speak to ourselves, the dialogue going on in each of our own heads all the time, and how we speak to others, the kinds of requests and promises that we make to each other. The clarity of that. I've been in a process over the last year and a half working with a brilliant advisor named Fernando Flores that has attuned me to the bullshit in my own internal conversation. And I'm not there by any means, but I catch myself more and more realizing, wait, what I just said isn't true. It's not like I'm lying. It's like it's just it's not an accurate reflection of what I really meant, or what really matters, what really has power in a conversation with somebody else. We make excuses all the time. We reduce our sense of our own power, and just kind of putting a little bit of an internal eye on, is what I'm saying true? Is it aligned with my purpose? Is it a contribution to somebody else? Does it help advance our shared purpose together? Big power there. It shows up in the work, the offers that we make, the structures that we build, the flows and the systems and behaviors that I've been speaking about. It shows up in how we choose to make assessments of things. Do we just have opinions? Or do we make assessments that actually contribute to somebody? Are the assessments actually grounded in real experience that is shared, or is it just an opinion? We had in Palo Alto last year, we had 6 months of internal debate over how we should price our EV charging stations in city garages. Palo Alto hat's back on now for a moment. And some people said we should price it at this level, and some people said we should price it at this level, and back and forth for 6 months, just opinions. No evidence, no grounding, no basis for the opinions. We could have argued forever. Or somebody could have just said, I'm the boss, it's going to be this way. What we did instead was, I think, a pretty cool thing. We went to city council and said, there are the 3 elements to EV charging. There's the drop charge to connect, there's the power charge for what you charge, and there's the squatter charge for if you stay at the charger beyond when you're full, denying it to other people. We said, let's do that. Here's a price range within each of those. Instead of the normal practice, which is that council approves a price, we go and run it for a year or 2 and come back and say, let's change it now. We said, give the staff the authority to adjust the pricing within those windows over the next 6 to 12 months. Let's get real life experience on the ground, then let's come back with data, and then let's think about what we should really do. Very different way of deciding. Because we recognized that we were doing our own BS process of trying to convince other people with no basis. And I include myself in this. I had a strong opinion. I have no idea if it was right. And when I finally realized that, I can just kind of say, well, let me shut up and stop trying to push my own subjective point of view, but figure out how do we get to something that's smart here. Really key in this is acknowledging what people really care about. And you know this to some extent if you're doing sales, you know it to some extent if you're doing political organizing. What really matters is understanding what the person you're talking to really cares about. Not what you think they should care about, not what you think they should do, but what really matters to them. And let me share with you a story from Bill Reed, former colleague of mine, one of the founders of the LEED Green Building Rating System. Bill describes himself as more of a lapsed architect now. He's not building buildings, he's working with communities on community-level design strategies. He was brought in a few years back to a community in the northeastern United States that had a beloved private school that was wanting to expand. And the expansion plans not only accommodated growth of the student population, but it was going to be super energy efficient and renewable and water cleaning and ecological landscaping, all the cool stuff that we all love. But a lot of people didn't want it to happen, and the community started lawyering up. And neighbors were preparing to go to war with each other for the next 5 years. And Bill got brought in and asked to get all the stakeholders together in a room. So the school, the teachers, the planners, the contractors, the zoning officials, the parents, the lawyers, everybody they could think of who touched this thing, the kids, got them into a room together and then locked the door. And he went around the room and said, what's your position on this project? He'd say, well, I'm for it, I'm against it, for it. Just kind of went around the room and everybody talked about what their position was. And then he went back and said, why is that your position? And you'd give your reason. Too much, more traffic. Oh, I hate it. Or easier access for my kids at school, I like it. And around the room with the reason. And then went around again and asked the question again, what's the reason for your reason? And then went around again. Some of you recognize this as the 5 whys process that's at the core of the Toyota production system, which revolutionized manufacturing around the world to get down to root causes. Well, as Bill did this over the course of a day with these couple of dozen people, they got to the point where everybody looked around the room and said, wait a minute, we all agree. We actually have the same concerns. We're perceiving them differently and we're expressing them differently. We're interpreting them differently in terms of what gets us there, but we all have the same concerns about the well-being of our children and the quality of life of our community and so forth. And Bill said, okay, now let's start talking about the design of this facility. And they redesigned the project that was already super energy efficient, became 60% more energy efficient. It was already water efficient, became 80% more water efficient. The economics got better. And for me, the metric that really stands out for me is that a county that hadn't given a zoning variance in 10 years gave a zoning variance in 3 months. What's the value of that? If you think about the time value of money, What's the value of that? What's the value of a community not spending 5 years in litigation with itself? Huge. By focusing on what people really care about and surfacing that. I was just yesterday with Justine Solheim, who's the CEO of Ben & Jerry's, who said, you know, the challenge is to learn how to think with your heart and to feel with your brain. And I love that, because it sort of starts to point to the direction of where we might go with this. So how do you do this? You know, we do this by cultivating new mindsets as the fundamental underpinning for deploying new tools. We tend to focus on tools as modern Western humans, but the tools arise out of the mindset. And that's really, there's leverage there. We do this by developing a shared principle-based understanding of the 3.8 billion years of R&D that nature has gifted to us, and using that as the orienting compass for making the decisions that we make. Solheim at Ben & Jerry's says that the original people, planet, profit platform that Ben & Jerry's built in, 1988, is still a mandated part of every decision that the company makes, without compromise. Every decision has to accommodate all three as best as they can at any given moment. We do this by nurturing conversations with each other that open possibility, that forge commitment, that ensure accountability, and that replace resignation with resolution, resolve. And by, as I said before, providing a clear line of sight that connects everybody in your organization, including your CFO, and including your most inexperienced employee, that connects purpose and goals and actions and impacts for everybody in your organization and in your value chain and in your community of interest, so everybody can get the feedback of the impact of their actions on what matters to them and to the rest of the network. Why? To enable diverse teams, and hopefully increasingly diverse teams, to work with the magical balance of what my friend Aletta Leonard has called autonomy within a coherent whole. How do you have an organization where people can act independently but aligned at the same time, not through top-down control, but through an understanding of where common purpose is and how it plays out in the world, and to include not just the rear-view mirror metrics of financial reporting and even CSR reporting and ESG reporting, but also the radar metrics that could disclose potential disruption and identify the disruptions in your metrics. And the only word I need to say about that is blockchain, and we can talk about that later. So let me just close with a provocation here. Because since the biggest competitive advantage this century is going to belong to the people in the organizations who can see through the fog that's obscuring the world for everybody else, and see the reefs and see the clear channels that the fog is obscuring for your competitors. How will you nurture your organization's capacity to navigate in this Anthropocene era, in the face of uncertainty? And you might think, I don't know if I can, but as our friend Thelonious Monk once said, whatever you think can't be done, somebody will come along and do it. So let me close. I mentioned that there are three things to remember. I'd like to close with just three offerings from some profound teachers of mine. 2,000 years ago, a gentleman named Rabbi Tarfon said, "It is not your responsibility to finish the work, but you're also not free to desist from starting." So that's one that I check in with every day. I'm not going to get it done. I'm not going to perfect it, but this is what there is to do. Adrienne Marie Brown, a totally new name to me, I just discovered her work a couple of weeks ago, said in a webinar, said, "All organizing is science fiction." I thought, say what? She said, "All organizing is science fiction and intrinsically spiritual, because we have faith that we can build a world that we've never experienced." And I would suggest that's what everybody in this room is doing now. We are building something, we can see it, we can taste it, we have some sense of it. We haven't lived it yet, but we know it's possible. And this is one of our challenges to people who don't see it and taste it yet, is to put that over the line. But let me close with a really fundamental strategic business question from the poet Mary Oliver. Tell me, what is it that you plan to do with your one wild and precious life? Thank you.
So we're a little bit over the published time of finishing, but and those of you who need to get out of here, please get out of here.
And I'm happy to stick around for a bit if folks would like to chat.
Yeah, so we'll have a little Q&A. I'd encourage you to take a look at our sponsors and spend a little time with them. So again, I'll let you all leave if you need to, but if you want to take a few Q&A? Up to you. Why don't we do that? Why don't we do a little Q&A?
Who's got one?
Tell me, what do you got about against sustainability?
It's boring. You've all heard the line from Bill Dunn and Michael Braungart, and I say to you, like, how's your marriage? And you say it's sustainable, and I say, God, I'm really sorry to hear that. How about vibrant, exciting, creative, renewing, regenerative, restorative? How about that? Sustainability is basically about slowing the damage and not having things get any worse than they are. And that's a good place to start, but that's not what animates the human soul. What animates the human soul is doing something better that enriches and that really, you know, I got my start in this work with Buckminster Fuller like 100 years ago. I can't think of that, 1972. And Bucky's personal philosophy was to work for a world that works for 100% of humanity in the shortest possible time, through spontaneous cooperation, without ecological offense or the disadvantage of anyone. And I heard that as a 23-year-old kid, and I said, sign me up. That's my life's work, and that's, you know, much more interesting than sustainability. Yeah. Somebody else?
That's just a very practical question. So for the real estate industry, especially in California, there's, I know there's some regulations on reporting, but there really, it seems to me, needs to be greater regulation for when people are buying a home by the bay, and I'm just wondering, you know, that industry in general, are they starting to embrace the issues, adaptation issues around climate change, and then also from a state governmental level, what might be done?
Yeah. Hard to generalize on an industry, but like some of them are and some of them are not. Some of the tract home developers like Pulte and KB are building much more energy efficient homes. They're starting to recognize the value of transportation and community design. City of Mountain View is requiring as an entitlement condition that the developer of a residential and commercial property attend to the transportation demands of their residents. So they actually, the developer becomes responsible for lowering the single occupancy vehicle commuting rate. So you're seeing things like that. On the other hand, you know, we still let people build on floodplains. We still insure people for building on floodplains, pay them money to go back and rebuild on those floodplains. So we're confused about this. And I say we, both at the level of local government and policy, but also at the level of individual people who want to put their home where they want to put it. You know, I decried quarterly capitalism before, but we're all participants in that. I mean, any of you check the returns on your 401k? You ever rebalance your portfolio based on what the returns are looking like? We're in the game, right? And so balancing the short term and long term and building it into the mechanisms of policy is pretty challenging. Yeah.
So what is Palo Alto? What's Palo Alto, the city, doing to address that 71% of transportation carbon impact?
Short answer: electrify everything, which, as Carlene and others talked about, starts to bring down the greenhouse gas impact, but then also develop mobility as a service and other ways to reduce the use of private cars. The question that I ask is, how do we make it more convenient for anybody, anywhere, at any time to not have to get into a car and drive? Because we wind up with just electrified vehicles in the current commuting patterns. We still have, 2-hour commutes and the second worst traffic in the country. And, and this is connected with this question. So transportation and housing are the same connected issue, which our policy folks can't really deal with very effectively. California is adding population at 10 times the rate that it's adding housing. In case you're wondering why real estate prices are like they are here. They cannot be different if that's the disjunction, but we have a lot of folks that don't want to build housing. So we got issues.
In working with government, what have you discovered ways to bring policy into alignment with the urgency of the situation?
It's a really tough question that I've been chewing on a lot this last week because frankly, there is very little urgency in government.
We're trying.
There's very little urgency. Yeah, we are. Many of us are in many ways, but it's not wired up for urgency. It doesn't have the resources, but it doesn't have the feedback systems. It doesn't have the ability to take risks. Palo Alto, case in point, I'm sure this is true here in Marin and in other jurisdictions. You've got really good, capable, smart, experienced people, very dedicated. Many of these people have chosen a life of public service and could be doing other things. They really want to do that. But they're in an environment where, risk is not encouraged. Success is pat on the back, maybe. Failure is dangerous. People get very nervous and very cautious. In the case of Palo Alto, which is the city that I know the best, there's a tendency to, what I would say, plan excessively, trying to figure everything out before you move. But we're in a time of urgency and uncertainty. It means we have to be able to move fast and make experiments. We call Palo Alto the heart of Silicon Valley, and we're surrounded by these agile enterprises doing lean startup, and we are not that. We'll take 4 years to plan something, or 2 years to plan something, then 4 years to run it, and then 2 years to evaluate it, and then think about what to do. Well, in a world that changes as fast as your smartphone, you can't do 4 and 5 year planning cycles. You have to be able to get a pretty good idea, run with it, learn from it, revise, and revise, and revise. So we're trying to bring that kind of thinking into the game. It's not easy.
Thank you.
One more, or are we done? One more, Robert.
Yeah, sure. I'm keeping my eye on Chris. Thank you. Very inspiring. I've heard you off and on over 25 years, and
Not bored yet?
not bored yet at all. The genius is coming through. So I'm curious about Palo Alto focusing its climate efforts on more technological solutions. Transportation, heat pumps, solar, etc. Paul Hawken and Drawdown, opens up a whole nother range of living solutions, right? Agriculture, food systems, food waste, carbon sequestration, all of that.
And education of girls.
Yes, and women, yeah. So is there a way, was it a conscious choice for Palo Alto just to not talk about that stuff, or was it, and what would you do if you could, knowing all that you know now from that book, what would you do?
Semi-conscious choice, Robert.
Okay.
I came in with a lot of grand ideas. And I came in with a choice. I figured I could either hit the ground running with a 100-day program, or I could hit the ground and walk around and listen to people a lot. And I chose to do that. I still wonder if that was the right choice, and I think it was. Because who am I to walk in with a program to tell people to do something differently? But one of the things I learned is that there's a finite appetite organizationally for new ideas and for change. And I couldn't drop 100 different ideas on people. I had to focus on a few, and we focused on where the city has direct leverage. So, jurisdictionally in California, cities have control over building codes. Boom. Palo Alto has control over the utility. Boom. So we start there. Transportation, we have less control over. We can certainly, electrify the city fleet, which we're in the process of doing slowly. We can, to some degree, expand the EV charging infrastructure and hopefully encourage it to expand more. So that's a little bit broader control, and then we're working with surrounding jurisdictions on mobility strategies that are multi-city, because we can't solve this by ourselves. It's ultimately a Bay Area regional problem. So there, the main leverage is to use the really international brand of the city as a convening function to say, come on, let's sit down and talk about this. And if we do that, people will come and talk. We can't affect how people commute from San Francisco to the Palo Alto Research Park. But we can hopefully start to set some wheels in motion and encourage more of these new mobility strategies that several of the speakers have talked about to, again, make it more attractive for people not to drive. And we're still challenged by that. We're going to be building new parking garages while we're working on new mobility strategies. So it's, it may look a little bit contradictory, but that's the reality of politics. And you move through it as best you can.
Thanks, Gil.
You bet. Thank you all. Thanks for having me.
What a morning. I hope you all enjoyed yourselves, learned something, were inspired. Take a look at greenmarin.biz for video and slides. And look for our Access to Capital Summit coming up June 13th. And that's going to be down at the community center, all about funding your organizations. And then put on your calendar October 25th for the Sustainable Enterprise Conference. It's even going to be better than last year.
Quick mention.
Yeah.
Please check in if you do Facebook. Please check in at VenturePad. Just quick little social media mentions helps us get the word out, get the buzz out, the word of mouth.
Like Drawdown
Twitter.
on Facebook.
Like Drawdown on Facebook.
So, how many of you would like to do more of these throughout the year? All right, that's good feedback.
All right. You're going to kill me. Thanks, everybody. Have a good rest of the afternoon.
A lot better than I expected.
Don't forget your umbrella.
Actually, since you're going to change the markets of corporation, you're probably going to do a share. Yes, I have a list in my head here. Somebody here knows there's a bunch of major companies and I talked about Ben and Jerry's. One of them, they got set up by Unilever. And so they were very interested. They were not wanting to sell. Unilever was very hungry to buy. So they had some leverage in the conversation. And so they really